She was just another kid. Then everyone collapsed. The pilots. The crew. All 236 passengers unconscious from toxic air. Now 11-year-old Maya Chen sat alone in the cockpit of a flying Boeing 737, with zero real flight experience and one impossible choice: land or crash. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun breaks through scattered clouds as United Airlines Flight 447 sits at the gate at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, a Boeing 737-800 being prepared for its transcontinental journey to Boston Logan International. The aircraft gleams under the early light, its engines silent as ground crew swarm around it, completing pre-flight checks, loading luggage into the cargo hold, and ensuring every system meets the exacting standards required for commercial aviation. Inside the terminal, passengers gather at Gate C7, a typical cross-section of American travelers clutching boarding passes and coffee cups, business professionals tapping on laptops, families wrangling excited children, elderly couples moving slowly with rolling carry-ons, and solo travelers absorbed in their phones while waiting for the boarding announcement that will send them on this 5-hour journey across the country. Among this crowd sits 11-year-old Maya Chen, a small figure in jeans and a purple hoodie with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her backpack resting against her legs as she watches planes taxi past the terminal windows with the fascinated expression common to children who find airports endlessly interesting. To anyone observing her, she appears utterly ordinary, just another unaccompanied minor making what the gate agents have marked as a routine flight to visit family, her paperwork indicating she's traveling alone to stay with her aunt in Massachusetts during her school's fall break. The bright yellow lanyard around her neck identifies her as a young passenger requiring special attention from the flight crew, and nearby travelers occasionally glance at her with the benign concern adults naturally feel toward children traveling without parents, wondering if she's nervous or excited about her journey. What none of them can see is the weight Maya carries invisibly, the grief still fresh from losing her father just 8 months earlier when Captain David Chen's private plane went down during a storm over Montana, ending not just his life but Maya's entire world as she knew it. Her father had been a commercial airline pilot for 23 years, accumulating over 15,000 hours in the cockpit of various aircraft, and from the time Maya could talk, he had shared his passion for aviation with his daughter in ways that went far beyond the casual conversations most parents have with their children about their work. He had taught her to read aeronautical charts before she could multiply fractions, explained the physics of lift and drag using her toy airplanes as teaching tools, and allowed her to sit in actual cockpits during his off hours when regulations and friendship with maintenance crews permitted, pointing out every instrument and explaining its function in language she could understand and gradually making more complex as she grew older and her comprehension deepened. By age 9, Maya had logged hundreds of hours on professional flight simulation software her father installed on their home computer, not the simple games marketed to children but the same programs used by actual pilots for training, complete with realistic physics engines, accurate aircraft systems, and emergency scenarios that could challenge even experienced aviators. Her father had guided her through countless practice sessions, teaching her pre-flight checklists, standard operating procedures, navigation techniques, and most importantly, how to handle emergencies ranging from engine failures to electrical malfunctions to the complex choreography of bringing an aircraft safely to the ground when systems failed or conditions deteriorated. He had drilled her on radio communication protocols, explained the relationship between pilots and air traffic controllers, and made her practice the calm, professional demeanor required to fly even when fear threatened to overwhelm rational thought, telling her that the best pilots weren't necessarily the most talented but the most composed under pressure. After his death, Maya had continued using the simulator almost obsessively, finding comfort in the familiar routines her father had taught her, feeling closest to him when she was working through the same procedures he had performed thousands of times in actual aircraft. Her mother, consumed by her own grief and struggling to manage the practical challenges of suddenly becoming a single parent, had barely noticed the hours Maya spent in the small home office that still smelled faintly of her father's cologne, headphones blocking out the world as she practiced approach after approach, landing after landing, emergency procedure after emergency procedure. When the gate agent's voice crackles over the intercom announcing pre-boarding for passengers requiring special assistance and families with young children, Maya gathers her backpack and joins the line, drawing smiles from the crew members who check her boarding pass and welcome her aboard with the exaggerated enthusiasm adults reserve for children traveling alone. A flight attendant named Jennifer, probably in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a practiced maternal warmth, personally escorts Maya down the jetway, making small talk about whether this is Maya's first time flying alone and whether she's excited or nervous about the trip. "I fly this route all the time," Jennifer says as they step into the aircraft, the familiar smell of recycled air and cleaning products filling Maya's nostrils, "and I promise it's going to be super smooth and easy. We'll take good care of you, and before you know it, you'll be hugging your aunt in Boston." Maya smiles shyly, thanking Jennifer in the quiet voice of a well-mannered child, and allows herself to be led down the aisle toward seat 23A, a window seat that will give her a view of the journey. Jennifer helps her stow her backpack in the overhead bin, shows her where the safety card is located in the seat pocket, and explains in simplified terms how the seatbelt works, demonstrating the mechanism as though Maya has never encountered such technology before. Maya settles into her seat, pulling out her tablet and a pair of headphones, the picture of a modern child ready to entertain herself through hours of flight with movies and games. The man in 23B, a heavy-set businessman in his 50s who smells of coffee and aftershave, gives her a friendly nod as he struggles to fit his carry-on bag into the already crowded overhead compartment. "Traveling all by yourself, huh?" he says with the joviality of someone who considers himself good with kids. "That's pretty brave. When I was your age, I wouldn't have had the guts to get on a plane without my parents." Maya offers a small smile and a modest shrug, the response of a child who doesn't quite know how to engage with stranger adults, and the businessman seems satisfied with this, turning his attention to his phone. Captain Michael Torres and First Officer Sarah Mitchell are completing their pre-flight preparations in the cockpit, running through checklists that have become second nature through thousands of hours of repetition. Torres is a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation, a meticulous pilot known among his colleagues for never cutting corners and maintaining a textbook approach to every flight regardless of how routine it seems. Mitchell, younger and less experienced with only 6 years in commercial cockpits, nonetheless brings sharp analytical skills and a dedication to continuous learning that Torres appreciates, making them an effective crew combination. The boarding process reaches completion with the efficient choreography of experienced gate agents counting passengers and reconciling manifests, confirming that all 236 people ticketed for Flight 447 are aboard and accounted for. The forward cabin door seals with the distinctive metallic thunk that marks the transition from ground operations to flight operations, and moments later the pushback tug engages, slowly backing the Boeing away from the gate. Maya feels the familiar sensation of movement as the aircraft begins its taxi toward the active runway, the whine of engines increasing as Torres advances the throttles slightly. When their turn comes, Torres aligns the aircraft with the runway centerline, advances the throttles to takeoff power, and the acceleration presses Maya back into her seat as the engines achieve full thrust. At rotation speed, Torres pulls back gently on the yoke, raising the nose wheel off the runway first and then letting the main landing gear follow as the wings generate sufficient lift to overcome gravity and launch 236 people into the sky. Maya watches the ground drop away through her window, Seattle's urban landscape spreading below them as the Boeing climbs steadily. The flight proceeds normally for the first 90 minutes, the Boeing crossing into Idaho airspace and beginning the traverse of the Rocky Mountain region. Air traffic control hands them off from one center to another with routine efficiency, and Torres and Mitchell maintain their professional cross-checking of instruments and systems. Neither of them notices anything unusual about the pressurization system that maintains the cabin environment, the complex pneumatic systems that extract bleed air from the engines and condition it to provide breathable atmosphere for everyone aboard. What they cannot know is that a microscopic crack has been slowly propagating through a seal in the air conditioning pack located in the unpressurized area beneath the cockpit, a manufacturing defect that has escaped detection during maintenance inspections. When the seal ruptures completely, hot bleed air that should have been cooled and conditioned before entering the aircraft instead floods directly into the environmental control system, carrying with it trace amounts of engine oil and hydraulic fluid. These chemicals, when heated to extreme temperatures and aerosolized into breathable particles, create a toxic mixture that immediately begins circulating through the aircraft's ventilation system, invisible and odorless but carrying the potential to cause rapid incapacitation. The effect is not instantaneous, which makes it far more dangerous than an obvious emergency. Torres is the first to feel something wrong, a slight headache and a sensation of mild confusion that he initially attributes to fatigue. Mitchell experiences similar symptoms moments later, a vague feeling of disorientation and difficulty focusing on the instrument displays. Neither pilot recognizes they are being poisoned because their cognitive functions are being impaired by the very toxins they need to identify. In the cabin, the contaminated air spreads more slowly, but eventually the toxins reach the passenger compartment where 234 people sit unaware of the danger developing around them. Jennifer is standing at the forward galley preparing another round of drinks when she feels a wave of dizziness that makes her grip the counter for support. Her colleague Mark, working the aft galley, experiences a sudden headache that seems to explode behind his eyes. Maya notices something is wrong before most passengers because her father had drilled into her the importance of situational awareness, the constant monitoring of one's environment that separates careful observers from people who sleepwalk through dangerous situations. She feels the subtle changes in her own body, a slight lightheadedness and a tingling in her fingertips that doesn't match any normal experience of flight, and she looks around the cabin with growing concern. The businessman beside her has slumped in his seat with his mouth hanging open, his tablet fallen into his lap, his breathing shallow and irregular. Across the aisle, a young woman has stopped typing and stares blankly at her screen, her face pale and confused. The realization hits Maya with cold certainty that something catastrophically wrong is happening to everyone aboard the aircraft, and her mind immediately goes to her father's teachings about emergency scenarios. She unbuckles her seatbelt and stands on shaky legs, fighting against the toxins beginning to affect her own system, and moves into the aisle where she can see more of the cabin. Passengers throughout the aircraft are in various stages of incapacitation, some slumped unconscious, others moving sluggishly or staring with vacant expressions, and the flight attendants who should be responding to this obvious emergency are themselves compromised. Maya's training kicks in despite her age, despite the fear threatening to overwhelm her, despite the voice in her head screaming that she's just a kid and shouldn't have to deal with this situation. She remembers her father's words about aviation emergencies, his insistence that panic was the enemy and that the only way to survive impossible situations was to work the problem step by step. The most critical issue is obvious: the aircraft is flying itself on autopilot with no one conscious enough to control it, and unless someone takes action immediately, all 236 people aboard will die. She makes her way forward through the cabin, stepping carefully over outstretched legs and fallen carry-on items, noting mechanically that she seems less affected than most of the adults around her, perhaps because of her smaller body mass or perhaps simply because she's paying attention to her symptoms and fighting to remain conscious through sheer willpower. Jennifer looks at her with unfocused eyes as Maya approaches, trying to form words but producing only mumbled sounds that make no sense. The cockpit door is closed and almost certainly locked according to security protocols, but Maya remembers her father explaining that there are emergency access procedures for flight attendants who need to enter the cockpit if both pilots are incapacitated. She finds the intercom panel near the door and picks up the handset, pressing the button that will activate the flight deck speakers. "Hello. This is Maya Chen in the cabin. I think everyone is getting sick from bad air or something. The flight attendants aren't responding and passengers are passing out. Can you hear me? Please respond if you can hear me." The silence that follows is more terrifying than any response could have been, confirming her worst fear that the pilots are as incapacitated as everyone else, leaving the aircraft flying blind with no one at the controls who possesses the training or authority to bring it safely back to Earth. Maya presses the emergency access code into the keypad beside the cockpit door, the numbers coming from some deep memory of her father explaining security systems, and steps back as the door unlocks with an electronic click. She pushes it open and immediately sees the unconscious pilots slumped in their seats, Torres with his head rolled back and Mitchell collapsed forward against her harness, both completely unresponsive despite the aircraft continuing to fly smoothly on autopilot. Maya closes the cockpit door behind her and moves carefully forward between the pilot's seats, finding the jump seat where observers can sit during flight and buckling herself in. Her hands are shaking as she reaches for the radio panel, finding the transmit switch exactly where she expects it based on her simulated training, and pressing it to send her voice out to whatever air traffic controller is currently responsible for their sector of airspace. This is United Flight 447, and I'm not a pilot. Both pilots are unconscious and I think most of the passengers are unconscious too. I'm 11 years old but I've trained on flight simulators and I know basic procedures. I need help right now please. The transmission seems to hang in the air for an eternal moment of silence. Then a male voice comes back through the cockpit speakers, professional and controlled but carrying an undercurrent of shock. United 447, Denver Center, say again your last transmission. Did you say both pilots are unconscious? Maya presses the transmit button again, forcing herself to speak clearly despite the trembling in her hands. Denver Center, affirmative. Both pilots are slumped in their seats and not responding. Most of the passengers and flight attendants are unconscious or really out of it too. I think something is wrong with the air in the plane. I'm the only person who knows anything about flying, from simulators, and I need you to help me figure out what to do. When the controller comes back, his voice has shifted into the tightly controlled tone of emergency operations. United 447, understand you have an emergency situation with incapacitated crew. We're going to help you through this step by step. First question, can you see the autopilot panel? It should have buttons and lights near the center of the glare shield. Maya scans the complex instrument panels, finding the autopilot mode control panel exactly where her simulator training has taught her it would be located. Yes, I can see it. It shows we're at 7,000 feet and it has some numbers for heading and speed. The controller's voice comes back immediately. Okay, that's excellent. That autopilot is flying the plane right now, keeping you level and stable. Can you tell me what the fuel gauges are reading? Maya finds the fuel displays after a moment of searching. The gauges show about 42,000 pounds on the left and 41,000 on the right. Is that enough? The controller's response carries a note of relief. That's plenty of fuel. Now I need you to check something very carefully. Look at the environmental controls, there should be a panel that controls cabin pressurization and air conditioning. Do you see switches labeled with things like pack or bleed air? Maya locates the environmental control panel on the overhead console. Yes, I found it. There are switches for left pack and right pack, both showing on, and bleed air switches that are also on. The controller's voice takes on new urgency. Okay, this is important. We think contaminated air from the engines might be making everyone sick. I need you to turn off both pack switches. This will stop bringing in air from outside. Maya reaches up and flips both pack switches to the off position. The subtle background hiss of the ventilation system changes noticeably, and within seconds she feels her head beginning to clear slightly. I turned them off. The noise changed and I think I feel a little better already. The controller's voice carries cautious optimism. Good job. Now we need to give it some time and see if the pilots wake up. In the meantime, can you tell me where you learned about flight simulators? Maya swallows hard before answering. My dad was an airline captain, he flew 737s mostly. He taught me on professional simulator software starting when I was 9. I've practiced takeoffs and landings, engine failures, all kinds of emergencies. But it was all simulation, never a real aircraft. The admission hangs in the air with the weight of everything it implies. The controller processes this information and comes back with professional composure. Okay, that's actually more training than most people have. We're going to assemble the best possible team to help you. For now, just monitor the autopilot and make sure it stays engaged. Minutes crawl by with agonizing slowness as the Boeing continues its eastward track across Wyoming. Maya turns her head to look at the unconscious pilots, searching for any sign of recovery now that fresh contaminated air has stopped flowing. Captain Torres remains motionless, his breathing shallow but steady, while First Officer Mitchell has shifted slightly but shows no signs of consciousness. The realization settles over Maya that they might not wake up in time, that the impossible burden of bringing this aircraft down safely might fall entirely on her shoulders. The radio crackles to life again, a new voice this time, older and carrying the authority of deep experience. United 447, this is Captain Richard Blake, retired Boeing instructor pilot. I'm joining to help walk you through this situation. Can you tell me your name? The human connection in the question steadies Maya's fraying nerves. My name is Maya Chen. My dad was Captain David Chen, he flew for United before he died last year. There's a pause before Blake responds. I knew your father, Maya. He was an outstanding pilot and an even better person. He'd be incredibly proud of how you're handling yourself right now. I'm going to help you do exactly what he would have done, step by step, until we get everyone safely on the ground. Are you ready to work together on this? The mention of her father threatens to crack the fragile composure Maya has built around her terror, bringing tears that she blinks back furiously. Yes sir, I'm ready. Please tell me what to do. Blake's voice becomes crisp and professional. First let's check on those pilots again. Try speaking loudly to them or touching their shoulders. Maya unbuckles and leans forward, reaching out to shake Captain Torres's shoulder while calling his name. He doesn't respond at all. She tries the same with Mitchell, getting no better result. Neither one is responding. They're breathing but they won't wake up. Blake's acknowledgement is matter of fact. Understood. That means we're preparing for you to land the aircraft yourself with our guidance. Now, I know that sounds terrifying, but that airplane is designed to be flown by people, and we have every system available to make this manageable. You have autopilot systems that can do most of the work. Your job isn't to be an experienced pilot, it's just to follow instructions carefully. Can you do that? Maya thinks about her father, about all the hours he invested teaching her, about his insistence that aviation was ultimately about discipline and procedure rather than natural talent. She thinks about the 235 other people whose lives depend on whether she can find the strength to try. Yes sir, I can do that. Good. Now we need to decide where you're going to land. We're looking at Denver, which is almost directly below you now. It's a major airport with the longest runways and all the facilities we could need. We're going to guide you through a descent to 10,000 feet first, which will help those passengers, then position you for a straight approach to one of Denver's runways. The whole process will take about 30 minutes. I need you to acknowledge you understand. I understand. Descend to 10,000 feet and then approach Denver for landing. Blake's next instruction comes with careful deliberateness. Okay, we're going to start by setting up your descent. Look at the autopilot mode control panel, you should see a button or knob labeled vertical speed or V/S, find the control and tell me when you've located it. Maya's eyes scan the panel, finding the vertical speed selector. I found it. There's a knob labeled V/S and a display showing 0 right now. Blake walks her through the procedure carefully. Now turn that knob counterclockwise until the display shows -1000. That's a gentle descent. Make sure your hand is only on that knob. Confirm when you're ready. Maya positions her fingers on the vertical speed knob, her hand looking impossibly small against the adult-sized controls. My hand is on the vertical speed knob only, I'm ready. Blake gives the command. Go ahead and turn it to -1000. Maya twists the knob slowly, watching the display count down to -1000. For a moment nothing happens, then she feels the subtle change as the autopilot commands the nose to lower slightly, beginning a controlled descent. The descent has started, the altimeter is going down. Blake's voice comes back with reassurance. Outstanding, you did that perfectly. Now you're going to monitor that descent all the way down to 10,000 feet, which will take about 27 minutes. While we're descending, check periodically to see if either pilot is showing signs of waking up. Maya settles into the strange routine of monitoring the descent, watching the altimeter count backwards while occasionally checking on Torres and Mitchell, neither of whom shows any change. The autopilot flies with mechanical precision, making tiny corrections to maintain the programmed descent rate. Blake comes back on frequency with updates every few minutes, checking that Maya is managing properly and offering encouragement. "You're doing great, Maya. We're passing through 25,000 feet now. When we reach 10,000, we're going to level off and slow down, then start turning toward Denver and positioning you for a long approach to runway 34 right, which is 16,000 feet long. That gives you plenty of room." The mention of landing sends a fresh spike of adrenaline through Maya's system. "What if I mess up the landing?" Blake's response comes without hesitation. "First, you're not going to mess it up because I'm going to talk you through every step, and second, that runway is so long we have room for mistakes. The aircraft has systems to help you. Your job is just to follow guidance and trust that the airplane wants to fly correctly." The descent continues through 15,000, 12,000, watching the altimeter wind backwards. She checks the pilots again, noting with disappointment that neither shows consciousness despite the lower altitude. "Maya, we're coming up on 10,000 feet. When the altimeter shows 10,000, turn the vertical speed knob back to 0, which will tell the autopilot to level off. Confirm you understand." "Understood, turn vertical speed to 0 at 10,000 feet." She watches the altimeter closely as it counts down, and at exactly 10,000 feet her hand goes to the knob and twists it back to 0. The aircraft responds immediately, the nose coming back up and stabilizing. Level at 10,000, the descent stopped. Blake's approval comes through clearly. "Excellent work. Now we need to slow down. Look for the speed window on the autopilot panel. We're going to reduce to 180 knots." Blake walks her through the speed reduction gradually, and as they slow, Maya feels the aircraft's character change, the flight controls becoming more responsive. "We're going to start the turn toward Denver now. The airport is about 40 miles south and west. I'm going to have you dial in a heading of 220 degrees. Maya finds the heading control and dials in the new heading, watching as the autopilot commands the aircraft into a gentle bank. Through the cockpit windows, the landscape wheels slowly, the Rocky Mountains visible along the western horizon, Denver's metropolitan area spreading across the plains ahead. Blake guides her through frequency changes as they're handed off to Denver approach control. A new controller comes on, a woman with a voice that carries authority. "United 447, Denver approach, we have you on radar. Emergency equipment is standing by. Wind is 340 at 8 knots. We'll vector you to intercept the localizer for the ILS approach." Blake immediately simplifies. The localizer is like a radio beam extending from the runway. When you follow it, it will guide you right to the touchdown zone. We're going to get you lined up with that beam. Blake talks her through setting up the navigation radios to receive the ILS signals, tuning frequencies and identifying the correct station. Maya finds herself falling into the rhythm of cockpit procedures, the call-and-response pattern of instructions and confirmations. "Maya, when you see the vertical needle on the course deviation indicator start to move from the right toward the center, that means you're approaching the beam." Moments later she sees the needle begin moving, sliding across the display. When it approaches center, Blake has her press the approach mode button, activating systems designed to capture and track the ILS signals. The autopilot commands a turn to align with the localizer, the aircraft banking smoothly. "Outstanding, you're tracking the localizer perfectly. Now we need to intercept the glide slope, which is the vertical guidance. When the horizontal needle starts to move down from the top, that's the glide slope." Maya watches the glide slope indicator with intense focus, seeing the horizontal needle begin its descent. When it approaches center, Blake has her verify the approach mode is engaged, and the autopilot captures the glide slope, beginning a descent that will continue to the runway. "You're on the glide slope, beginning final approach. You're about 12 miles from the runway. Everything looks perfect. How are you feeling?" "I feel okay, not dizzy anymore. The pilots still aren't waking up though. Blake's voice remains steady. That means we're committed to having you complete the landing. The autopilot will fly down to about 200 feet above the runway. At that point, you're going to disconnect the autopilot and take manual control for the final landing. The aircraft will be stable and you'll just need to make small corrections. The most important thing is the flare, which is when you'll gently pull back on the yoke to raise the nose just before touchdown. I'll talk you through it step by step. The descent continues inexorably, the altimeter counting down through 8,000, 7,000, 6,000, the ground rising to meet them. Through the windscreen, Maya can see the airport ahead, a vast complex that from this altitude looks like geometric patterns across the brown plains. 5,000 feet, you're doing great. At 3,000 we extend landing gear, then at 2,000 we'll deploy flaps. The aircraft will slow and feel more sluggish, but that's what we want. At 3,000 feet, Blake talks her through extending the landing gear. Maya finds the gear lever and moves it down. The aircraft shudders as the wheels deploy into the slipstream. 3 green lights illuminate, confirming all gear assemblies have extended and locked. Gear down and locked, 3 green lights. Blake confirms and directs her to the flap lever. Maya extends the flaps incrementally, feeling the aircraft slow and the nose pitch up with each increase. They descend through 2,000 feet, fully configured for landing, slowing toward the target approach speed. The runway fills the windscreen, close enough to see painted markings and emergency vehicles staged alongside. Maya's father's voice echoes in her memory, "Don't think about crashing, focus on flying correctly." 1,000 feet, perfectly on glide slope and on speed. At 500 feet I'm going to have you place your hands gently on the yoke, just feeling how the autopilot is controlling but not fighting it. At 200 feet you'll press the disconnect button and take manual control. The radar altimeter shows them descending through 800, 700, 600. At 500 feet, Maya reaches out with trembling hands and grasps the yoke, feeling the subtle movements the autopilot is commanding. 400 feet. 300 feet. 200 feet, disconnect the autopilot now. Maya's thumb finds the large red button and presses it, hearing the warning chime. The yoke comes alive in her hands, requiring constant tiny inputs to maintain the descent path. "I have control, autopilot is off." Blake's response is immediate. "You're looking good. Watch your speed, reduce power very slightly to get back to 130. Maya finds the throttles and pulls them back fractionally. The runway is rushing up, close enough to see individual lights along its edges. 100 feet, you're over the threshold. Start reducing power slowly, we're going to begin the flare. Gentle back pressure on the yoke, just small movements. Maya pulls back carefully, feeling the nose rise slightly, the descent rate decreasing. Her father's voice echoes, "The flare is about patience, let the aircraft settle gently." 50 feet, you're flaring nicely. Keep coming back, slowly, smoothly. 30 feet, power to idle, let it settle. Maya pulls the throttles all the way back, feeling the aircraft begin to sink. She continues the back pressure, raising the nose higher, fighting the urge to overcontrol or freeze. The runway surface floats up toward them, and then with a chirp of rubber on pavement the main landing gear makes contact, absorbing the aircraft's weight. Maya pushes forward on the yoke to plant the nose gear, feeling it touch down with a second impact. The aircraft is rolling now, still traveling over 100 miles per hour. Maya's hands move to the throttles where she finds the thrust reversers. She pulls the reverse levers up, deploying systems that redirect engine thrust forward, and simultaneously presses both feet on the brake controls. The deceleration presses her forward as brakes and reversers combine to dissipate the aircraft's energy. The runway centerline stays ahead as Maya maintains directional control with small rudder inputs. Speed decreases rapidly through 80 knots, 60 knots, 40 knots, finally slowing enough that Maya can relax slightly, knowing they're no longer going fast enough for a catastrophic loss of control. At 20 knots, she brings the aircraft to a complete stop on the runway, thousands of feet of pavement still ahead of them, more than enough margin for her imperfect but ultimately successful landing. Her hands are shaking violently now as adrenaline floods her system, the immediate crisis past but her body only beginning to process what she has just accomplished. Blake's voice comes through the speakers, and for the first time she can hear emotion breaking through his professional composure. "Maya, you did it. You just landed that aircraft perfectly and saved every single person aboard. Your father would be so incredibly proud of you right now, and so am I. Emergency crews are approaching now, they're going to take care of everyone and get medical attention for the pilots and passengers. You can just sit there and rest, you've done more than anyone could have asked." Maya can see the emergency vehicles racing toward them, fire trucks and ambulances converging on the stopped aircraft. She realizes she's crying, tears streaming down her face as the terror and stress of the last hour finally overwhelm the composure she's been maintaining through sheer willpower. Through her sobs, she manages to press the transmit button one more time. "Thank you for helping me. I couldn't have done it without you talking me through everything." Blake's response carries warmth that transcends the professional relationship between controller and pilot. "You're an extraordinary young woman, Maya, and you have a natural gift for aviation that your father clearly recognized and nurtured. What you did today will be studied and remembered for as long as people fly airplanes. Now let those emergency responders take care of you and everyone else." Emergency personnel reach the aircraft within minutes, firefighters approaching cautiously to ensure there's no immediate danger before paramedics rush aboard to assess the condition of the incapacitated passengers and crew. Maya remains in the cockpit jump seat, emotionally and physically exhausted, as medical personnel work to revive Captain Torres and First Officer Mitchell, administering oxygen and beginning treatment for toxic exposure. Other paramedics move through the cabin, triaging passengers based on the severity of their symptoms and beginning the process of evacuation and treatment. A firefighter appears in the cockpit doorway, a large man in full protective gear who looks at Maya with an expression of absolute astonishment. "Are you the one who landed this plane?" Maya can only nod, too drained to speak, and the firefighter shakes his head in disbelief. "I've been doing this job for 22 years and I've never seen anything like this. You're a hero, kid. A genuine hero." Over the following hours, as passengers and crew are transported to hospitals for evaluation and treatment, as investigators begin the process of determining exactly what caused the toxic exposure, as news of the unprecedented emergency spreads through aviation circles and then to the wider public, Maya sits in a quiet room at the airport being examined by doctors and questioned gently by officials who need to understand every detail of what happened. Her mother arrives on an emergency flight, rushing to embrace her daughter with a ferocity born of nearly losing her, and Maya finally allows herself to fully break down, sobbing into her mother's shoulder as the weight of what she experienced begins to process. Captain Torres and First Officer Mitchell recover fully after treatment, the toxic exposure having caused temporary incapacitation but no permanent damage. When Torres is finally able to speak with Maya days later, he tells her with absolute sincerity that she saved his life and the lives of everyone aboard, that her actions represented the highest traditions of aviation, and that her father had clearly prepared her for a moment no one could have anticipated. The other passengers, once they learn who brought them safely to the ground, express gratitude that transcends simple thanks, understanding that they owe their lives to an 11-year-old child who refused to panic when faced with impossible circumstances. The investigation reveals that the seal failure in the air conditioning pack was a previously unknown failure mode, a combination of manufacturing defect and stress cycles that created a situation that had never occurred before in the Boeing 737's operational history. The findings lead to immediate inspections of similar systems across the entire fleet and modifications to maintenance protocols to prevent any recurrence. Maya's quick recognition of the toxic exposure and her decisive action in shutting off the contaminated air supply is credited with preventing fatalities, giving passengers and crew time to recover once the toxins stopped circulating. In the months that follow, Maya becomes reluctantly famous, the subject of news coverage and aviation industry recognition that she finds overwhelming and uncomfortable. She gives a few carefully managed interviews where she explains that she was simply doing what her father taught her, following procedures and trusting in the systems that generations of aviation professionals had developed. She deflects praise to Blake and the other controllers who guided her, insisting she couldn't have succeeded without their expertise and calm guidance. But those who know aviation understand the truth, that no amount of guidance could have helped someone who lacked the fundamental knowledge, the practiced skill, and most importantly the extraordinary composure under pressure that Maya demonstrated. Emergency personnel reached the aircraft within minutes, firefighters approaching cautiously before paramedics rush aboard to assess the incapacitated passengers and crew. Maya remains in the cockpit jump seat, emotionally and physically exhausted, as medical personnel work to revive Captain Torres and First Officer Mitchell, administering oxygen and beginning treatment for toxic exposure. Other paramedics move through the cabin, triaging passengers and beginning evacuation and treatment. A firefighter appears in the cockpit doorway, a large man in full protective gear who looks at Maya with absolute astonishment. "Are you the one who landed this plane?" Maya can only nod, too drained to speak, and the firefighter shakes his head in disbelief. "I've been doing this job for 22 years and I've never seen anything like this." "You're a hero, kid. A genuine hero." Over the following hours, as passengers and crew are transported to hospitals for evaluation and treatment, as investigators begin determining what caused the toxic exposure, as news of the unprecedented emergency spreads through aviation circles and then to the wider public, Maya sits in a quiet room being examined by doctors and questioned gently by officials. Her mother arrives on an emergency flight, rushing to embrace her daughter with a ferocity born of nearly losing her, and Maya finally allows herself to fully break down, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. Captain Torres and First Officer Mitchell recover fully after treatment, the toxic exposure having caused temporary incapacitation but no permanent damage. When Torres is finally able to speak with Maya days later, he tells her with absolute sincerity that she saved his life and the lives of everyone aboard, that her actions represented the highest traditions of aviation, and that her father had clearly prepared her for a moment no one could have anticipated. The other passengers, once they learn who brought them safely to the ground, express gratitude that transcends simple thanks, understanding they owe their lives to an 11-year-old child who refused to panic. The investigation reveals that the seal failure in the air conditioning pack was a previously unknown failure mode, a combination of manufacturing defect and stress cycles that had never occurred before in the Boeing 737's operational history. The findings lead to immediate inspections of similar systems across the entire fleet and modifications to maintenance protocols to prevent recurrence. Maya's quick recognition of the toxic exposure and her decisive action in shutting off the contaminated air supply is credited with preventing fatalities, giving passengers and crew time to recover once the toxins stopped circulating. In the months that follow, Maya becomes reluctantly famous, the subject of news coverage and aviation industry recognition that she finds overwhelming and uncomfortable. She gives a few carefully managed interviews where she explains that she was simply doing what her father taught her, following procedures and trusting in the systems that generations of aviation professionals had developed. She deflects praise to Blake and the other controllers who guided her, insisting she couldn't have succeeded without their expertise and calm guidance. Her story becomes required reading in aviation training programs, analyzed not for techniques to replicate because the scenario was so unique, but for what it reveals about the importance of basic aviation knowledge, the value of simulation training, and the unpredictable nature of emergencies that can require anyone to step up regardless of age or official qualifications. Blake's calm, methodical guidance of Maya through the landing becomes the gold standard for how controllers should handle situations where they're working with untrained individuals attempting to fly aircraft. Maya returns to school after several weeks, trying to resume normal sixth-grade life despite the extraordinary attention her experience has generated. Her classmates treat her with a mixture of awe and awkwardness, not quite knowing how to relate to someone who has done something so far outside normal childhood experience. Maya finds comfort in the routine of schoolwork and ordinary concerns of adolescence, grateful for anything that makes her feel like a normal kid rather than the subject of international news coverage. Months later, United Airlines holds a private ceremony honoring Maya and presenting her with an award for extraordinary heroism. Captain Torres and First Officer Mitchell attend, both having returned to full flight duties. Many passengers from Flight 447 come as well, wanting to personally express their gratitude. Jennifer, the flight attendant who had escorted Maya aboard with maternal concern, embraces her tearfully and tells her that she thinks about her every single day with overwhelming gratitude. During the ceremony, Blake appears via video link from his home, his face showing the emotion he had kept controlled during the emergency itself. "Maya, what you did that day transcends anything I've seen in 40 years of aviation. You honored your father's memory and his teaching in the most profound way possible. Every person here today is alive because you refused to give up, because you trusted in your training, and because you found courage that most adults would struggle to summon. The aviation community is forever in your debt." Maya stands at the podium to say a few words, still uncomfortable with public speaking but wanting to acknowledge what the experience has taught her. "I think a lot about that day, and about all the people who helped make it possible for everyone to survive. My dad always told me that aviation is a team effort, that no pilot succeeds alone. That was definitely true for Flight 447. Captain Blake and all the controllers, the emergency responders, everyone played a part in why everyone lived. I was just the person who happened to be in the cockpit, doing what my dad taught me. I miss him every day, and I hope he would be proud that his teaching mattered when it really counted." The audience responds with sustained applause, recognizing the grace and humility in her words. Many are crying, moved by the poignant connection between a father's legacy and a daughter's extraordinary application of his lessons. Maya's mother watches from the front row, her expression showing pride mixed with the ongoing processing of how close she came to losing her daughter. In the years that follow, Maya's experience influences her life trajectory in profound ways. She continues her education with renewed focus, excelling in mathematics and science with the same discipline her father had taught her to apply to aviation procedures. When she reaches high school, she joins the Civil Air Patrol and begins formal flight training, discovering that while the trauma of Flight 447 has complicated her relationship with flying, it hasn't destroyed her love for aviation or her desire to honor her father's memory. On her 16th birthday, Maya takes her first lesson in an actual aircraft, a small Cessna trainer that feels impossibly tiny compared to the Boeing she had landed under emergency conditions. Her instructor watches carefully as she handles the controls for the first time with official supervision, noting the unusual precision and maturity in her approach. When they return and Maya shuts down the engine, she sits quietly for a moment, tears streaming down her face as the experience finally gives her closure on the trauma of that day 5 years earlier. Maya continues her flight training with dedication, earning her private pilot certificate on her 17th birthday and beginning to work toward the commercial ratings that would eventually allow her to follow in her father's footsteps as an airline pilot. She never forgets the weight of responsibility she carried at age 11, the knowledge that hundreds of lives depended on her maintaining composure and executing procedures correctly. That experience informs every aspect of her aviation career, making her extraordinarily cautious and methodical in her approach to flying. Eventually, Maya returns to flight training full-time, earning the advanced ratings and accumulating the flight hours necessary to apply to major airlines. When she interviews with United Airlines, now in her late 20s, the interview panel includes Captain Torres, who has risen to a training position. He smiles at her and says, "Welcome to United, First Officer Chen." Maya joins the airline that had employed her father and that had been the operator of the flight she saved, bringing her unique journey full circle. Maya Chen's extraordinary landing of United Flight 447 at age 11 remains unmatched in aviation history, a convergence of tragedy, preparation, and courage that saved 236 lives and proved that heroism can emerge from the most unexpected sources when circumstances demand it. Her story becomes a permanent part of aviation history, taught to every generation of pilots and controllers as an example of how preparation, procedure, and human courage can overcome seemingly impossible circumstances. But for Maya herself, the legacy she values most is the simple continuation of her father's passion, the daily dedication to flying safely and professionally that honors his memory far more than any single dramatic event ever could.